Last month, I showed you how to run all of your AI locally, including your LLMs, your vector database for RAG, and N8N for your agent workflows. We did this all using the local AI starter kit developed by the N8N team. However, there was one huge component missing that a lot of you requested in the comments: Open WebUI, so that we could have a nice and feature-rich interface to chat with our local AI setup. So today, I am super excited to unveil to you exactly that. I have added Open WebUI into the local AI starter kit and created the custom functionality to make it possible for you to chat with your N8N workflows directly in Open WebUI, just like you would with any model that you have running with Ollama. And with Open WebUI, you can even use voice to talk to your N8N agents. How cool is that? Open WebUI is an open source ChatGPT-like interface that you typically use to chat with LLMs that are running with Ollama. However, they have a couple of key features, namely functions and pipelines, that give you the power to implement custom functionality on their platform to do things like chat with your own agents and API endpoints. And that is what I leverage here to build this Open WebUI and N8N integration. And I even have this integration published on the Open WebUI's function list on their website. So I'm going to walk you through step by step how to set up this entire local AI package yourself, including setting up a basic AI agent workflow in N8N and integrating it with Open WebUI so you can chat with it there. If you haven't seen my other video on the local AI starter kit, I would highly suggest that you go and check that out. But you certainly don't have to have seen that already to follow along here. This is really, really exciting stuff, and you'll see in the video that you could easily take this N8N integration and extend it to be able to use any agent that you create with Open WebUI. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So let's take it from the top and go back to the original repository that I forked to create my own version with Open WebUI. I would not be doing service to open source if I didn't go back to this repo and show it off, because huge thanks to the N8N team for creating the original repo for the self-hosted AI starter kit. Essentially, what this repository does is it gives you a Docker Compose file. And so we combine containers from all these different services together in one place so that you have a neat package to host everything locally that you need to get started with local AI. So specifically, the services that are included here is N8N to build our workflow automations and make AI agents with all the other services, Ollama for our large language models, Quadrant for our vector database for RAG, and then Postgres for our SQL database to handle things like chat memory for our agents. So all of these are containers packaged together, running completely locally, and it's just a phenomenal combination. You'll see later that I have a workflow set up as a demo that combines these all together to create a really neat and simple AI agent. And so what I did here to add on Open WebUI, if I go into this Docker Compose here, you can see that all these containers are just the different services here, like Postgres, N8N, Quadrant, and Ollama. I just added one for Open WebUI, and I'll show that in a little bit as well once I go over to my repository. So this Docker Compose is really, really simple. In fact, this whole project is really simple, but that's the best part about it, is it doesn't have to be complicated to get started with local AI. And I think that's one of the big reasons that my last video on my channel for this blew up so much, is because it just makes having everything running locally so accessible. And so going over to my repository here, you'll see that the README, it looks pretty similar because I just forked the local AI starter kit and added my own flavor into it. And so I mentioned here that this is my version with a couple of improvements that I covered in the last video on this, and then also the addition of Open WebUI, and I'll show that in a little bit as well. And then I even have a link to my integration with N8N and Open WebUI that I mentioned in the intro. And so scrolling down to the list of what's included here, this list should look very, very familiar. The only addition here, of course, is Open WebUI. And if I go into the Docker Compose here, let me go back and go into the Docker Compose. All of this is going to be in the description of this video, so there'll be links to see the original repo, download my version, get that running, all the instructions for that as well. So definitely check that out. But yeah, in this Docker Compose right here, all I had to do was add a section for Open WebUI. So I'm pulling this as the fifth container for all of my services, since it is the fifth thing that I'm adding into this starter kit essentially. And so back over into the README here, I just want to go over the instructions really quick before I dive into that. I have customized everything to my repository. So all the git clone commands are going to be cloning my repo and working with the directories there. So I changed that up from the original repo. And then I also have 10 steps here for instructions on how to set up everything that I've got going on here, including the N8N and Open WebUI integration with the demo workflow that you'll have in your N8N instance automatically when you install it through my version right here. And so these 10 steps is what I'm going to quickly go over right now. So you could follow these in the README if you want, or you can follow along right here, and I'll show you how everything works and make it really nice and clear for you now. All right, so getting this installed from scratch, there's just a couple of steps that you need to do. I'm going to go over these quite briefly because in the last video on this on my channel, I went into it in a lot more detail. But essentially, all you have to do is follow the installation commands at the top of the README right here. So for example, if you have an NVIDIA GPU, you'd run these commands. For Mac, you'd run these ones. For everyone else, if you just want to run on the CPU, you would run these commands. And the only thing you have to do before this is you have to go to this env.example file and change up everything here to your liking and then rename it to .env. So this is going to define the settings for Postgres, like your username and password for the database, as well as what the database name is. And then for these encryption keys, you can just make this whatever you want. Just make it an alphanumeric string that's relatively long, but this is all running locally, so it doesn't really matter too much what this actually is. So after you have this renamed to .env, then you'll follow these instructions here in the README to do the docker compose command. And so I'm going to pull up my terminal here so you can see what it looks like. Let me bring this onto this monitor here. I just ran docker compose -- profile GPU - NVIDIA up. And then this is about what your output is going to look like. It's going to pull all the different containers, and then you'll start seeing a bunch of logs from all the different services here, like Postgres, Open WebUI, Quadrant, Ollama. And your terminal is going to hang because it's going to sit there and just constantly wait for log output from all the different services that you have running within this Docker Compose file. Now, to actually get Docker, I would recommend getting Docker Desktop. That's my preferred platform. I know a lot of people have different opinions on Docker Desktop versus just using Docker without it. Just do whatever works for you. But I'll have a link in the description for Docker Desktop if you want to install it and run this the same way that I am. So once you have this up and running like this, and you're getting all of this output, it'll take a little bit to pull the models that you want to run from Ollama. So I'm going to go back to my browser here and show you. In the Docker Compose file right here, if you want to change which Ollama models are pulled when you run the Docker Compose command, you just want to edit this line right here. So you can see right here that I'm currently pulling Llama 3.1 for my LLM, and then Nomic embed text for my embedding model that we also will be using in the N8N workflow. So you can just kind of copy this section right here and duplicate it, or just change the model, whatever you want to do to change which models are going to be available to you. And then you can also go into the Ollama container while it is running and pull more models that way as well. And I show how to do that in the other video on my channel for this. So at this point, you have everything up and running. And so what you can do now to go to N8N is you just go to localhost port 5678. As long as you didn't change any of the ports in the Docker Compose file, this is the URL to get yourself into N8N. It's going to have you create an account at first, but this is just a local account. You are not actually signing up for N8N. So everything is local, I promise you. Like you could literally use your social security number for the username and it'd be totally fine because it's all just setting up the account for your local N8N instance. And so once you're in it, if you spun up this whole thing using my setup, you're going to have this local RAG AI agent automatically in your N8N instance already because I have that packaged in this whole thing here. And so clicking into it, this is what we've got here as a nice little demonstration where I combine all of the different services together like Quadrant, Postgres, N8N, and Ollama. And this workflow is very similar to the one I have in my first video on this local AI starter kit, but I made a couple of changes, especially to make it a webhook, which is how we're going to integrate it with Open WebUI. So I'm going to cover this workflow very briefly here, but because the focus of this video in particular is on the Open WebUI integration, I'm going to skim over this and then move over to Open WebUI and show you how to actually integrate it with this workflow. So let's go ahead and dive right into this workflow, including how to set up all the credentials for N8N to connect to the different services like Quadrant and Ollama. Again, this is just a demonstration workflow. I had to build something so that we can have some substance to test out with the Open WebUI integration. But really, just using the webhooks here that I'll show in a little bit, you can set up any N8N workflow to work with Open WebUI. And we'll dive into that in a little bit, and I'll show you how you can really make it fit to your needs. So first of all, the way that this workflow works is we start with a webhook. And so within this webhook right here, it's just a post, and then we give a path, like I just wrote, invoke N8N agent. So this is going to give us a URL, and this is one of the things that we're going to feed into Ollama, so it knows the endpoint to hit to talk to our N8N agent. And then for authentication, I actually set up the function in Open WebUI to work with a header auth if you want to use a bearer token. But also because this is running locally, you don't necessarily need that authentication. So I'm just leaving that as none right now. And then be sure to change the respond from immediately to using respond to webhook node. That is really important. Otherwise, it will respond immediately to the OpenAI request without actually going to the agent and getting the output. So super, super important there. And then what we do is we go into our AI agent. And this is where we generate the response based on the prompt that is fed in from the webhook. So if I go to my executions here, like this one right here, and I go into the webhook, the body of the request has a session ID. That's how we have a unique identifier for the chat history. And then also chat input. Chat input is the field that has the prompt for our LLM. And so that is what we feed into our tool agent right here. So it takes the previous node chat input value as the prompt. And then we use Ollama for our chat model. And to set up your credentials for Ollama, all you have to do is click on create new credentials. And if I go into the one that I currently have, the base URL is just going to be http:// Ollama and then the default port for Ollama, which is 11434. So this is all you need to do. And then you can click on save and it'll test the connection. And then you are connected to Ollama. And then it'll automatically use that for all the other nodes that we have here for Ollama, like our embedding model that we use both here and here, for example. And then for Postgres, it's a little bit more, but it's not too tricky overall. All you have to do, again, click on Create Credentials, and then for your host, it's just going to be Postgres, because that is the name of the Postgres container. So that's how the containers communicate to each other. And then the database, user, and password are all based on the values that you set in the .env file that I covered earlier. And then all the other settings can remain the same. And then you click on Save, and it'll test out this connection as well, just like it did with Ollama. And then when we get the response from the agent, we're going to respond to the webhook with the first incoming item. So this is going to take the output attribute from the LLM and then return that to Open WebUI when it made that webhook request. And so that is it. That's everything we have for this workflow as far as the actual flow. And then I can also cover the tools here because we have the vector store tool that is hooked into our agent for RAG. And so for this, we're using the Quadrant vector store. We're just retrieving documents based on the query. And then for the credentials here, again, you just click on create new credentials. For this, the API key doesn't actually matter. This is a big confusion in my last video where people are like, oh, is this actually local? Why do I need an API key? This is just there if you want to use the hosted version of Quadrant. But because we are running everything locally, including Quadrant, this can be whatever you want. And then for the URL, it's just http:// quadrant : and then the port, which is 6333. So again, Quadrant is the name of our Quadrant container in the Docker Compose file, and that's why we specified that right here. So that is everything for our tool. And then for our knowledge base, we are using Google Drive to ingest our documents. Now, you could use a local file trigger. You could use anything for RAG here. I'm just using Google Drive as an example where I'm ingesting these documents. I'm deleting the old vectors when I want to update a document, and then I'm downloading it, extracting the text, and then putting it into the Quadrant vector store. So a super simple flow. I went into a lot more detail on this in my other video. Just know that for the Google Drive credentials, this is another thing that I want to clarify here. It says that your OAuth redirect URL needs to be localhost, but that won't actually work. You can't use localhost to set up credentials in the Google admin console. So you just have to use a different domain, like an actual domain, not localhost, and then it'll work here. So don't worry about that. It's not a big deal that it tells you to use localhost. You don't actually have to. But also, you could just use the local file trigger because I know a lot of people wanted to use local files to make it entirely local, and you can do that as well. And then once you insert into the Quadrant vector store, I've done this workflow once through for a single file. You can actually go to this URL right here, localhost port 6333/dashboard, and you'll see your collection here for your documents, and it'll show you the vectors and everything that you have in here. And so there's a whole Quadrant dashboard as well with this whole setup, which is really cool to interact with your vector database outside of N8N as well if you just want to poke around with things. So that's definitely worth calling out as well. So that is everything that we have for this workflow. And now we can dive into the Open WebUI integration. All right, we have gotten to the best part because we are now actually in Open WebUI. And all you have to do to access your Open WebUI instance is go to localhost port 3000. It'll have you create an account, but just like with N8N, you're not actually creating an account with Open WebUI. It is just for your local instance. So don't worry, you don't even have to be on the internet to do that. It's just completely local for your Open WebUI instance. Now, one thing I want to say before I dive into the N8N integration is if you want to play with your Ollama models here in Open WebUI, you might notice when you click on this dropdown to select a model that it's actually pulling the models from Ollama hosted on your computer, not the Ollama that is running in the container with this local AI setup. If that is happening to you, and it actually did happen to me, what you can do is click on your name in the bottom left, go to the admin panel, click on settings and then connections, and there's going to be the place right here to change the URL for your Ollama API. This might be set to localhost or something like host.docker.internal. You want to change that to Ollama. Click on save in the bottom right and then reload your page. And then when you click on select a model, this dropdown should have the models that we pulled for Ollama in the container that we specified in the Docker Compose file. So just something really important that I wanted to get out there for you because I ran into that myself. Now we can actually dive into the N8N integration. And the way that we do this is with a function in Open WebUI called functions. So if I click on workspace in the top left here, and then click on functions. This is where we can specify any custom functionality that we want for Open WebUI to interact with our own agents and API endpoints, including an N8N webhook. So let me show you this really quick. If I go to the functions page of the Open WebUI site, you can see all these different really awesome functions that people have done for like a mixture of agents pipe. That's super cool. Or if you want to use Gemini models in Open WebUI or Anthropic, you can do all of these, and basically every single function is just a Python script that is created in a way very specific to what Open WebUI needs for a new integration. And so you have this pipe class here where you define all these valves, which are essentially just values that you can pass into the pipe, like your specific N8N webhook URL or your bearer token, all these things. And then, yeah, I'm not going to get into like a lot of detail with how you have to set this up, but it's very specific to Open WebUI. These functions are specific to what they expect for these kind of integrations. And so I actually learned how to do this through copying other functions and learning from other functions on the Open WebUI site. So I took one and kind of changed it to my needs, and that's how I built what I'm just about to show you right here. So let me click into this. This is my N8N pipe, and I've even published this to the Open WebUI site. So right here, you can see the creator is ColeAM, that's me. There's actually already 16 downloads, even though I published this today, which is super cool. I haven't even released the video. I'm recording it right now, and people have already downloaded it, which is super, super neat. So yeah, what I will show you right here is just a brief overview of this pipe, and then we will test it out. So essentially we have these valves, and so we have like the N8N URL, the bearer token, the input field. So this is basically what the user prompt is going to come in as to the webhook, which is that chat input property that I showed earlier. And then also we need to know with the JSON response to the webhook, what's the name of that property that actually contains a response from the LLM. And so these are both custom because you might have different attributes that you're inputting and outputting to your N8N workflows. And so if I go into my function here, go into the valves on the right hand side here. These are all things that you can customize. And so valves are essentially just parameters that you get to, as the consumer of the function, set for yourself without having to even go into the code. So that's the convenience of it here. So for my case, what I did for my webhook, you can see that it's invoke N8N agent. Going back to my pipeline here, that matches exactly with what the path I have set here for the webhook in the workflow. And one really important thing to keep in mind here is the way that the containers communicate with each other is based on the container name. So you don't actually use localhost for your N8N webhook URL in Open WebUI. You use N8N. So replace localhost with N8N, and then everything else matches exactly with what you see here within your N8N UI. And then going back to the function here, I have a function that emits certain status messages to the Open WebUI output, so you can see little updates as it's generating the response. And then I have this pipe function. This is the primary function that's the entry point to my customization. And it also includes the body. This is the list of messages that is the conversation, and that's what I add on to as well once I get the response from the LLM. So essentially what I do is I just extract the last question from the user, and I make an HTTP request, a post request, to my N8N URL. I pass in the bearer token, which is optional, and then my payload contains the session ID as well as whatever the user inputted for their last message. Now, for the session ID, there's not actually a way to get the chat ID from Open WebUI's chat here. So it's just a combination of the user ID and the first part of the first prompt. So that's the only thing that's like a little bit jank with this setup. If you know something better, please let me know, and I'd love to update this. But everything else is just like crystal perfect here. And so, yeah, we get the response from the LLM. We extract the output from the LLM based on that response field that we have as one of our valves. And then we append that to the conversation and then return that after we do some error handling as well. So that is everything for this pipe. So you can take this code and you can put it into the function yourself, like clicking into here and making a new function, or you can actually just click on Get right here and bring it into your Open WebUI instance without even having to paste in the code or anything. So it's really, really convenient. And so once you do that, click on Back and then make sure that you have it enabled. And then when I go back into a new chat and click on Select Model, I'll have this N8N pipe along with all my other Ollama models, and I can use it just like I would an Ollama model. So I can say something like, hello, how are you? All right, this is gonna go directly to my N8N workflow for the agent to get a response. All right, doing well, thanks for asking. How can I assist you? So I'll say, sure. What are the action items from the meeting? There's just one meeting in the knowledge base right now for RAG, so I just want to retrieve that and give me the action items from what I have in Quadrant. So let's see what it gives me here. There we go. Thank you for your patience. I found this information about the action items, and these four really silly things here, as crazy as it looks, this is the right answer because I just have something super silly that I put as a single document in my Quadrant vector store. This is looking perfect. And I can also go into the execution history for N8N and see that it is indeed using my N8N workflow for the AI agent. So over in N8N now, you can see that the latest execution, the output was, thank you for your patience, here are the action items, blah, blah, blah. And this matches exactly with what we see right here in Open WebUI. So it is indeed using the N8N workflow for the chat here. Even though it is just right next to all these Ollama models, it is something entirely custom and way different, which is super, super cool. And then the last thing that I want to cover here, if I go back to the function here, I just want to say that if I scroll to the bottom, you should be able to see how easy it is to customize this for whatever kind of agent you are running. Because you can make a post request to an API endpoint that is hosting something with LangServe, or maybe you have a Swarm agents or you're using Llama Index, whatever it is, you can do that here. So you can interact with really any agent you could want with Open WebUI, which is so cool. And also using the pipelines feature in Open WebUI, it's similar to functions, but you can install more external dependencies. So you can literally set up like LangChain or Llama Index or whatever within the code right here here that's running in Open WebUI, which is just so, so awesome. You can just do anything you could dream of here for your local AI setup. So last thing, as promised, you can use voice to chat with your N8N AI agents. It is just an incredible feature of Open WebUI, and one of the reasons it was so worth it to bring it into this local AI starter kit here. So all you have to do is click on the call button on the right-hand side, enable your microphone in the browser, and just get chatting. I have to be silent here except for when I'm actually talking to the model, otherwise I'll confuse it, but just listen here. It is really, really cool. Hey man, how's it going?
Hello. It's nice to meet you. I'm doing well, thank you for asking. How are you doing today? Is there anything I can help you with or any questions you'd like to ask?
What are the action items from my meeting?
Discuss the latest and greatest headphones.
All right, I'm gonna stop it there. So you can see that works really, really well. The only thing that's kind of awkward is I was playing the audio right out of my speaker, so it actually picked it up and thought I was talking when it was telling me what it said. But if you have headphones on or whatever, you won't run into that issue. But yeah, like it was worked really, really well. It'd be cool if they had more like custom voices and stuff that wasn't super robotic. I know that the Open WebUI team is working on that though, and so like this whole thing is like pretty new and it's getting more and more robust like every week. So really, really neat. I hope that you found this really cool just like I did. So there you have it. We have successfully extended the local AI starter kit to include Open WebUI and integrate it with N8N so we can chat with our workflow agents just like we would any Ollama model. And I am definitely going to keep extending this local AI stack in the future. So let me know in the comments how else you'd like me to extend it, what you'd want me to add in. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. If you appreciated this content and you're looking forward to more things local I would really appreciate a like and a subscribe. And with that, I will see you in the next video.